They called it the Dark Continent, but what if I told you that the only darkness was their ignorance? Africa, the cradle of civilization, the birthplace of mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, and storytelling, yet, for centuries, it was portrayed as backward, mysterious, and void of history. So, where did this name come from? And more importantly, who decided to turn a continent full of light into one labeled by darkness? Let's clear up the confusion. The term Dark Continent was popularized in the 19th century by European explorers, writers, and colonialists. One of the most infamous was Henry Stanley, the same man who allegedly said, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume?" To the west, Africa was a mystery, its geography unfamiliar, its cultures misunderstood, its people misrepresented. So they called it dark, not just because it was unknown, but because they refused to acknowledge what was already there. It wasn't just ignorance, it was a narrative. A colonial narrative meant to paint Africa as empty, silent, and in need of saving or civilizing. But Africa was never silent. Long before European contact, Africa had empires, powerful, organized, and wealthy. In West Africa, the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa was so rich, his pilgrimage to Mecca crashed the value of gold. Yes, literally. In Timbuktu, knowledge flowed like the Nile. Universities existed where people studied law, science, medicine, and philosophy, while many parts of Europe were still emerging from the Dark Ages. From the stone churches of Ethiopia carved from rock, to the skilled artisans of the Benin Kingdom, Africa's history is vast and layered. But these stories were buried, intentionally. So why hide it? Why call it dark when it clearly wasn't? The answer is painful, but necessary. The image of a dark and uncivilized Africa made it easier to justify colonization, slavery, and exploitation. It wasn't just a word. It was a weapon. This narrative allowed colonial powers to take, kill, divide, and control, all under the guise of bringing light to a continent they said was in the dark. Millions of lives were affected. Generations uprooted. Cultures erased. And yet, the lie still lingers. But here's the truth, Africa was never in the dark. Africa is light. And today, the world is starting to see it again. From Nigerian fintech startups shaking global markets, to Kenyan innovations solving water crises, to South African scientists breaking medical ground, Africa is not emerging, it's reawakening. The Dark Continent? That label no longer holds. The world is witnessing the brilliance, the color, the creativity, and finally, the truth. Africa was never dark. It was distorted. Lied about. Misunderstood. But now, we have the chance to retell our story, truthfully, proudly, and loudly. If this video opened your eyes, do me a favor, share this message. Hit like so it reaches more people. Subscribe if you want to explore more hidden truths. And in the comments, tell me, what's one African fact you think the world needs to hear today? Let's light up the algorithm with truth.